Welcome to the Ashford Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Catherine Myers, and I will be your host for this session. I'm excited to introduce Increasing Student Retention and Success with Information Literacy and Social Learning, presented by Holly Heatley, who is the current lead faculty for Gen 103 and former lead faculty for History 206 at Ashford University, and Max Fassnacht, who is the current lead faculty for History 206 and former core faculty for History 206. The chat window will be open during this session for your questions and comments, as well as a short Q&A at the close of this session. I will read your questions in the order it was posted once the presentation has ended. Now, without further ado, Holly and Max.
Hi, everybody. As Catherine said, I'm Max Fassnacht. I'm the current lead faculty for History 206. And last year, as part of the university-wide and DOJ-specific initiatives, both Holly Heatley and I were charged with a complete revision of the Modern American History course. And at that time, Holly Heatley was the lead and sort of took a leadership role in these revisions. These revisions included not only changing the assignments, but changing the textbook, as well as the course code, which was changed from History 204 to History 206. Going into the redesign, we were aware of several issues which the course faced. The course had already been identified as a, quote, high-risk or lowest retention course, with a drop, fail, withdraw, or incomplete rate of 36.1% during the 2013-2014 school year. Additionally, there was attainment of learning outcomes. Many students entered the class without the information literacy skills needed to research primary and secondary historical sources. And this was a crucial aspect of the written assignments. Students often finished the course still struggling with college-level research skills and writing and information literacy skills. So the redesign of History 206 was guided by research. In identifying the problems we needed to address, we turned to the program review written by the History Department in 2013, information supplied by the Gardner Institute's Gateway to Completion, institutional effectiveness and research data provided by Ashford University, as well as our own experience teaching the course over the past several years. Looking over these sources, a pattern emerged which led us to focus on students' lack of information literacy and opportunities for social learning as ways to improve the class. So after consulting the data and talking it over, I developed the hypothesis that implementing information literacy and social learning strategies would result in improvements in student retention, student attainment of learning outcomes, and overall student experience in the course.
So in relation to information literacy, in all versions of this course, going back at least 5 years, students have been required to write a final research paper using a specific number of primary and scholarly secondary sources. In the past, the design of the course was based on a number of assumptions that we had about our students. We had always assumed that our students coming into History 204 had taken enough classes that they understood citing sources and plagiarism. We assumed that they understood what primary, secondary, or primary historical sources are or could figure that out on their own, and we assumed that they all knew what scholarly secondary sources are and could locate them. However, the reality is that these assumptions are not true for some and perhaps many of the students who take History 204, now History 206. So when we designed History 206, a major goal was to meet students where they are, and that meant teaching them these information literacy skills. In looking for information literacy curriculum models that would fit History 206, we found the research and composition model outlined by Thomas P. Mackey and Trudi E. Jacobson in 2004. This model fits History 206 well because it emphasizes identifying and incorporating discipline-specific sources into research projects and using correct documentation. The Mackey and Jacobson research and composition model fits well into History 206 because it can build on early information literacy and instruction, and it provides exactly the skills needed to successfully complete the final research paper. Drawing on a number of studies that show that students learn information literacy more effectively if they are incorporated into discipline-specific work, we employed this strategy of introducing the skill by having students complete a tutorial, watch the video, or visit web pages that explain the skill, take a short quiz to test immediate comprehension, and then have students apply the skill to historical material in the classroom, both in the discussion boards and in the written assignments. So here you can see a table that shows the specific information literacy skills that we cover, how they're introduced, and how they're applied. For example, we start in week 1 with plagiarism and citing sources. History 206 students complete the Ashford Academic Integrity module and review the Ashford Writing Center pages on APA formatting. They are then expected to correctly cite their sources for all work for the entire class. So as we gathered information for this presentation, we noticed something interesting. It appears that our instructors have been much more consistent about enforcing citing and referencing of sources now that they are certain that students have been instructed in how to do this than they were before. So here in week 2, you can see that students complete a tutorial explaining what historical primary sources are so that they can identify them correctly. And then they're required to discuss the primary source in the week 3 discussion board and to find at least 2 for the week 3 and week 5 assignment. And you can see that week 3 and week 4 follow a similar pattern.
So, as previously mentioned, data provided by the Gardner Institute identified History 206 as a high-risk course with a DFWI rate of 36.1% for the 2013-2014 school year. Multiple studies have cited social learning as a factor which can improve retention, with several in-house studies pointing to the increased need for social learning opportunities in Ashford's classes. Social learning strategies have been indicated in at least 2 Ashford studies. The first is Why Students Withdraw, prepared by Ashford's Planning and Effectiveness Committee, which recommended the university, quote, determine and implement specific interventions which enhance social integration. The second study is Ashford's History Program Self-Study, which proposed that increased opportunities for social learning be explored as a method of improving retention, persistence, and overall student experience. Outside of Ashford, several studies have supported the connection between social learning and retention. Among them, Tinto, Zhao, and Kuh. According to these studies, social learning can reduce the sense of social isolation, provide a network of support, allow students to apply concepts to real-life issues, and integrate academic assistance into the curriculum, allowing students to get academic support while earning credit. For us, the most useful study was Alfred Rovai's framework for implementing learning communities, which we used as a guide when developing History 206. When designing History 206, we found that many of the dimensions of social learning identified by Rovai were already present in History 204. The class began with a chance for students to introduce themselves in a special forum reserved for this purpose. There are also plenty of chances for interaction between students and between students and the instructor. Additionally, the Ashford Cafe allowed for informal student interactions. There were also plenty of chances for interaction between students and the instructor. At the same time, Rovai mentions the important distinction made by Hare and Davis between interaction which is task-driven and interactions which are socio-emotional. The discussions for History 204 tended to be task-driven, and as a result, the following factors were able to negatively impact the social aspects of the classroom. Student knowledge and personality, communication patterns, there was a reluctance to criticize, and also a fear of criticism and retaliation, and we also saw an unwillingness to give honest feedback between students. These factors identified by Rovai can, quote, negatively affect a sense of community by reducing feelings of safety and trust among learners. In contrast, task-driven interactions with socio-emotional interactions, what we can see when we look at these socio-emotional interactions is that these interactions are largely self-generated. So socializing can take on many characteristics, from exchanging empathetic messages to self-disclosure. As Rovai mentioned, according to Cutler, the more one discloses personal information, the more others will reciprocate. And the more individuals know about each other, the more likely they are to establish trust, seek support, and thus find satisfaction. Thus, increased disclosure of personal information can strengthen classroom community. As Tinto observes, social interaction via friendship support is directly related to persistence in college. And so this quote from Rovai really lets us see the importance of social learning and what it can accomplish in an online classroom. In implementing Rovai's framework for social learning, as we revised History 204 into History 206, we sought to introduce socio-emotional driven interactions in a way that would be operational in Ashford's standardized courses. So, we hear a lot about, will that scale? So that's what we were trying to make sure would happen. We were looking for something that would require little instructor training, be economical in terms of credit hours, be worth enough of the overall grade for students to participate, since as a lot of us have seen with the Ashford Cafe, it's not worth points, so students don't really go in there and make use of it. And then we also wanted something that would be open enough to be socio-emotional driven, but clear enough so that students knew what was expected of them. If we just said, here's an open forum, do whatever you want with it, you'd get a lot of student contact saying, okay, how do I get, all my points and whatnot. So as a result, we came up with a third weekly discussion called the Open Forum. The Open Forums ask students to address at least two of the following elements. What struck you in particular as you explored the materials this week? What insights have you had? What have you been struggling with? What questions have come up for you at this point? Do you have any helpful tips that you've picked up in the course or in a past course? Do you have any questions about the assignment that your classmates might be able to help you with? And then we also directed them to contact the instructor or post in the Ask Your Instructor forum if they had questions for their instructor. The open forum had no minimum requirement in terms of initial posts or responses. Instead, students were asked to post at least 100 words before the last day of the learning week. Instructions were given in the Prepare, Reflect, Write, and Respond format consistent with Ashford's Division of General Education courses. And I have a copy of that. If you want, you can email me at max.fassnacht@ashford.edu, and I'd be happy to supply anybody with those instructions so that they can see how we formatted them. The open forum is worth 5% each week for a total of 2.5% of the overall grade. So this was enough to motivate students to participate, but it was also low enough so that students who did not participate were not unduly penalized. It was also low enough to avoid concerns about lack of rigor in terms of assignments as well as in assessments. And students were graded on a participation basis, usually focused on word count. We also let instructors know that they did have the option of responding in the open forums. However, this was not required. So far, the outcomes affirm that the open forums do foster student achievement and satisfaction. Anecdotally, we've seen students use the open forums to share time management and study skills, empathize with each other over shared challenges, point each other to useful resources, provide each other with academic and emotional support, and this fosters a sense of connectedness. So in a way, we kind of have this thing where the open forums are sort of a virtual hallway, sort of right outside of class where students are congregating and sometimes they're complaining. They're offering support. They're kind of sticking together in terms of a class. But also what's interesting is that the open forums provide this cross-cut of the class, and it allows instructors as well as researchers, so when we go into another class, we can see what students are struggling with and how this is impacting them. And an example of this is that we just implemented what's called the Post First feature, in which students can't see other posts in a thread until they've posted there themselves. And we're able to see Do students like it? Do they not like it? Do they not like it but see why it's useful? Things like that. So in order to assess the impacts that these changes had on student experience, we turn to the end-of-course surveys. Oh, sorry, this is Holly.
So, right. So the revisions to History 206, 204, 206 were driven by research and data, and we've used research and data to analyze how they've affected the class. And what we've seen is that we've had improvements in DFWI rates, student attainment and learning objectives, and student experience of the course. So here you can see improvements to student DFWI rates. Based on the data from February 24th, 2015, when History 206 went live, to July 9th, 2015, we've seen a significant improvement in all areas measured. The pass rate increased by 16.1%. The drop rate decreased by 9.6%. The fail rate decreased by 10.3%. The average GPA increased by 0.51%. Course completion increased by 9.4%. And all course outcomes improved compared to History 204. And here you can see a graph representing student attainment of course learning outcomes. We found that the average of distinguished for all CLOs went up from 20.6% to 28.8%. The average of proficient went up even higher from 31.91 to 34.91. The average of basic dropped from 20.88 to 19.49. The average of below expectations dropped as well from 9.28 to 8.23, and the average of non-performance went down from 9.14 to 6.77. So this trend not only shows an improvement in attainment of learning outcomes, but is also a trend away from bimodal grading practices. So here we can compare how students did on the information literacy CLOs in History 204 and History 206. In History 206, the information literacy skills were combined into one CLO, while in History 204 they were in two CLOs. You can see that one CLO in History 204, there were more students, 32.71%, who were graded as distinguished than in History 206, where there were only 30.68% who were marked distinguished. However, we see a higher percentage of students in History 206 who are graded as proficient, 33.91%, than for either CLO in History 204. Taken together, those graded as proficient and basic made up 53.1%, which is really closer to what we expect to see. A major issue that has been repeatedly noted, not only in History 204, but in many courses, is bimodal grading, where many students are either distinguished or they're below expectations, with few falling in between. In reality, many of our students fall somewhere between the two extremes, so while we always want to see student improvement, we also want to see evidence of movement away from bimodal grading. I also think you can see on these two graphs a point that I made earlier. Because instructors know that students have received instructions in the information literacy skills, they're more comfortable being stringent in grading on them.
So in order to assess the impact that these changes had on student experience, we turn to the end-of-course surveys. As you can see from the legend, the gray color is the percentage of students who strongly disagree with the category statement. Orange is the percentage of students who disagree. Blue is the percentage of students who neither agree nor disagree. Yellow is the percentage of students who agree, and purple is the percentage of students who strongly agree. What we see is a positive change in every single category, with the exception of Category 3, which states hard work is required to earn a good grade in this class, which means that students in general feel like it's not as hard to get a good grade in the class, which is an interesting development given that course rigor was significantly increased in the revision from History 204 to History 206. Of course, when looking at these results, there are also several factors which may also have impacted student retention, success, and experience. Among these are other aspects of the course design, such as a change in the assignment instructions, content that was more geared towards Ashford's diverse demographic, and the change in the textbook. Additionally, other gen ed initiatives, such as the implementation of the Help Now and Kaltura videos, modeled examples of assignments, as well as changes in the format of the course, may have contributed to these positive changes. Finally, the improvement in instructor quality, including grading practices, might have been a part of this positive change. It might also be the case that instructors, knowing that students have received support on aspects of the assignment, such as how to research sources, may have held students to a higher standards when grading assignments. So one of the things about this is there's a lot of factors that went into this redesign of History 206, and that we haven't been able to particularly tease out which factor or element contributed to these changes, but right now we really do feel that this confluence of things had a really positive effect. But we are pretty confident that adding the course elements which target information literacy and provide social opportunities for learning improve retention, student attainment of outcomes, as well as the student experience. And while more research is needed to improve on these elements, as well as to understand how these elements work alongside each other or against aspects of that course, we're pretty confident in the fact that these developments did result in the effects that we saw. So thank you very much. Oh, and these are our sources.
Okay, so I'm looking at the chat, and I'm seeing that Stephanie has a question here. It says, to what extent would you estimate that the incorporation of the open forum contributed to your improved outcomes? And I'm sure that Max can speak to this, but I know that that I saw at least one student who specifically said that she was going to drop her class, but she didn't because of the encouragement that she received from her classmates in the open forum. So it's hard to say exactly how much the open forum is contributing to improved outcomes, but definitely it is. And, you know, it's very rare that you actually see a student who says exactly what you want them to in the discussion boards, but in that case, she actually did say exactly what I wanted her to. So that was kind of cool. I don't know, Max, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think, too, you know, I do think the open forums, in terms of with the outcomes, I think it definitely helped because you'd have students with the information literacy outcomes particularly, they would say, oh, I've never been to the library, I don't know how to do it. And another student would say, look, this is how you do it, you just have to do it. And when they see another student doing it, it makes a huge difference than when the instructor says, okay, here's the list of how to access library sources, because they see that it's possible for someone else to do it. Additionally, other things and other aspects of the learning outcomes, students are able to support each other in that way. And one of the things I'd like to do in a more comprehensive study is really go through the open forums and provide some more of that sort of the soft data of what students are saying, like Holly mentioned. But I wanted to stray away from that a little bit and look at the hard data because it's, you know, students, they can, sometimes what they say is happening is not always what's reflected in the data. But in this case, it really is. And we have a lot of students reacting really positively. So.
Well, to add to that also, you know, a lot of times students come to you and say, you know, I'm having a hard time doing my assignment because I have, you know, 3 kids and I work full time and I have these things I have to do, I have these things I have to do. But in the open forum, you know, they have other people who are in the same position and who can say, well, you know, I have those same stresses and this is how I deal with it. And that means a lot more to a student than if you say, oh, yeah, you know, I was a single parent going to school and I had to deal with it and I had to make a plan and blah, blah, blah. To them, you know, that may be true for you, but you've already done it. And so it doesn't mean as much to them as if they're talking to somebody who's in the same position as they are right now. So I think that that is a factor as well. Okay, looks like Julie Peterson also had a question. It said, I wonder, have you noticed any difference, greater freedom and engagement in the post in the week 3 discussion? I'm sorry, here, let me read the whole thing. It says, this is interesting. In my presentation on group discussions yesterday, as I was responding to questions in the chat, I ended up talking about creating alternative spaces for students to engage in the classroom. They have so few choices in terms of how they can engage in the classroom. I wonder, have you noticed any difference, greater freedoms and engagement in the post in the week 3 discussion?
Mm-hmm.
You want to take that one, Max? Go ahead.
I mean, just I have seen, and a lot of times students will take on the content in a very interesting and new way. And it's, you know, it's funny to see these students that will go well beyond the 100 word count limit and just have these really big posts and really interesting discussions because they have this something to say that isn't covered in the discussion prompts of the other discussions. So there's some students that do it and some students that just don't. So we do see a little bit more freedom. What I was hoping to see, and I haven't figured out how to measure it really, is I want to see if kind of the building of this cohesive community in the open forum results in a more vigorous and rigorous academic discussion in the other forums. And so that's what I'm kind of hoping to see, but I haven't figured out how to measure that yet.
Right. Yeah, I would say one of the interesting things I've noticed is I think that, well, especially in history, you know, we tend to want to say, okay, let me back up. I think in the week 3 discussion, it gives them a space to talk about sort of their personal feelings and reactions towards the material, where it is in the sort of content-driven discussions, we sort of want to talk about the evidence and the actual, what they learned from the material. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. I also think, you know, because we're talking about history, the week 3 discussion kind of gives them a space to talk about, you know, maybe their family history in a way that maybe the discussion boards don't give them a space to talk about that. So I think that's kind of been an interesting development there. Let's see, John Ackerman asked, what is the correlation between instructor quality and student success? Well, okay, that's not something that we looked at, although obviously along with everybody else in the Division of General Education, that's something that we're working on really hard through IQRs and mentoring and coaching and all of that. And I think that, especially in History 206, that they've made a lot of headway in getting really quality instructors in there. And I think that what we saw with the grading and with instructors knowing that students have had instruction in how to cite and reference sources has made a big difference in sort of how they're grading. I don't know, Max, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I guess, I would say that the quality of the instructor is, I can't imagine that it doesn't have an impact. It has to impact students, and I know that there's a lot of data to suggest that it does. These redesigns weren't necessarily there to kind of, I know this study sort of tends to ignore the role of the instructor, but the hope was kind of to present these redesign, or to have these redesigns support instructors so that they're not constantly, you know, what we try to do is build in the stuff that ends up being repetitive. So, you know, students asking, how do I get to the library? What's a primary and secondary source? So that those things end up not being something the instructor has to keep repeating themselves about, and they can focus on really engaging the students. And the more that an instructor engages the students, the better a student's experience is going to be. So these designs are, the hope is that they support really high quality instruction and individualized instruction, and allow, you know, the instructor to feel more like they get to log in and kind of individualize their interactions with students instead of kind of cutting and pasting boilerplate about what a primary source is.
Right. Well, and one of the things I know that I appreciated happened is that after we put in the information literacy instruction, I stopped getting a bunch of emails about how no other instructor had ever told them they had to cite sources, and they just can't believe I was making them cite sources and taking off points for it. So those emails stopped, which was a really great thing, and it allowed me to focus on other things. So I appreciate that. Let's see. Frank says, how does the halo effect influence these findings? Okay, I'm not sure what you're asking here, Frank. Can you expand on that question a little bit? Let's see, Frank is typing. Oh, and I see someone else wrote here, we hear all the time, never heard of citing rules, turn it in, etc. Yeah, that's exactly what I was just saying. I used to get those emails constantly. Nobody ever told me I had to cite sources. I can't believe you're taking off points for it. So yeah, that cut out all of those emails, and I really appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
So Stephanie said it would be interesting to examine information literacy skills of students in the class after History 206 and has new attention on History 206 made impact later in the student's experience. Yeah, that would be a really cool study, actually. Good idea, Stephanie. We'll have to do that. Okay, so Frank says, do these students know they were studied? If so, do you think they were aware? No. In fact, this is something we put together after the fact, and pretty much whenever we did the revision, we were just focused on fixing, well, first of all, we were focused on changing it from History 204 and then trying to fix some of the issues that we knew were a problem, and then we looked at the data after the fact to see what the outcomes were. So they did not know they were being studied.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess, I don't know how to the extent that we were studying the students as much as we were studying what the course design was going to do. So we weren't trying to see like, okay, you know, how do students behave when this happens? It's more, you know, when we do these changes, you know, yeah, do we see the positive changes in outcome and experience and stuff like that are already being measured by the university. So it's not like, you know, we're following individual students and seeing how they're reacting to certain things or things like that, because that raises the whole human subjects review kind of thing. And instead what it is it's just studying the effectiveness of certain practices.
Right, exactly.
Which part of the fun about working for Ashford is that there is all this data that, you know, it's already being measured. So when you do something different, you can see what that difference, what happens as a result of it.
Right. Yeah. There's always data being captured. Go ahead.
I wanted to mention Victoria's point about the open forums working regardless of the instructor, and then because that's an interesting point, because one of the things we want to look at is, you know, what impact does instructor involvement in the open forums have? Do they do better when the instructor never weighs in? Do they do better when the instructor is weighing in all the time? Do they do better when the instructor is waving in or coming in just a little bit? Let's see if Rachel.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm being reminded. Okay, so Rachel asked, as a librarian, I'm wondering how you worked with library faculty in improving the information literacy aspect of this course. Actually, Rachel, I have a master's in library science as well as a master's in history, and this is something that I have long been pushing. When I was first part of the history COLO department, and then whenever I moved over to the Division of General Education in charge of History 206, and I pretty much did this on my own. So the library was actually not involved in this one. This is something I pretty much did as my own initiative with Max and Victoria. So anyway, and then Stephanie. So the sense of community might perhaps at the very least bring at the bottom in terms of pass rate and retention. Yeah, I think you can say that in terms of, you know, the students who are getting it maybe helping out the students who are having a harder time not getting it, and also in terms of, you know, providing some peer encouragement and that kind of thing. I don't know, Max, do you want to add to that?
Well, I think just the overall just thing where they get to support each other has a huge impact. That's all I have to really add to that. And it makes them feel less isolated. The weird thing about Ashford students is that I think they sign up because they don't want to have the social commitments, but it turns out that it's the social commitments that motivate them and keep them in the course. So I found that even just in my emails to students, if you appeal to their social obligation to the course, they're more likely to respond and to make an effort in the course. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Right. Yeah. And there are some people who really just don't want to participate in the open forum, but it doesn't cost them. I mean, it's half a point. So if they don't want to participate in it, they really don't have to. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things you can get an A in the course and never post anything in the open forum. So. But yeah, it would be interesting to study what is the overall grade of students that aren't posting in the open forum and try to supplement that, figure out what to do with that information.
Okay, so Frank is typing. Let's see what Frank has to say. Okay, he says, did you use any particular tools of analysis to arrive at your percentages, or were these generated for Waypoint, etc.? Okay, so the graphs that we used, those came from Waypoint, and our assessment team actually generated the percentages for us. We created the graphs, but they generated the percentages for us. Let's see, the other percentages that we have, those came from, let's see, those came from assessment also, I believe. Isn't that right, Max?
Yeah.
Institutional assessment?
Right. And that what they do is they're looking at how the improvements to retention and DFWI rates over time and sending those out.
Right. So they didn't rely on us to do the math, which is a good thing.
Right. And then the end-of-course survey data was just a compilation of all the students' end-of-course surveys that were handed in. What'll be interesting to see is now that there's an initiative to kind of get more students to fill those out, how that's going to change as well, because I'm sure, as you know, the end-of-course surveys are a little bit bimodal. Students who either hate the course or love the course are the ones that fill those surveys out.
Yeah, that'll definitely be interesting when we get more people filling this out. Cool. Okay, anybody else have any questions? Okay, cool. I guess that we're done. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you all, Holly and Max. Thank you to everyone who participated and listened in the chat. This presentation will be available for viewing in the CETL, and then we'll be sending out a live session, we'll send out an email when that live session is available. Also, don't forget to go to the TLC app and rate this session, as well as use the link in the room for a quick end-of-session survey. That link is right below the sources slide that you're seeing right now, titled End of Session Survey. Please take a few minutes to do that. And then finally, look for an end of conference survey for you to provide more in-depth feedback. But thank you all again for your participation. Thank you to Max and Holly. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the session.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.